He said there were men here who at night became beasts of the woods, leaving no trace of their human form. Human footprints that turned into animal prints mid-trail. Villagers being attacked by walking cats with human eyes. It's not just a hairy giant. It is a creature with a gaping mouth in its stomach. And it has long hook-like claws. It has backward-facing feet. It has skin as tough as an alligator, and sometimes a single glaring eye like a cyclops. And only when the relatives look closer do they see what's missing. The eyes. The eyes are missing. They are always carefully scooped out of their sockets. The teeth are removed from the jaws, and the fingernails and the toenails are stripped away.
You have entered the 21st century dystopian portal. Welcome to confusion, welcome to question, and welcome to clarity. The life is in the blood.
Welcome back to the 21 CD podcast. As always, it is your ghost John. All of my links are in my description. You can find a buy me a coffee there if you like me enough to take me on a coffee date. My Instagram is there, my Spotify, and also my audio-only platforms if you're not in a position to watch video right now. And if you like this type of content, be sure to share it with your friends. That helps me immensely. Hit the little bell icon on YouTube to stay notified. And my followers have also been notifying me lately that hype points exist. Those help a lot too. On Spotify, you can give me a 5-star rating to help me stay in the algorithm. And all of this is immensely helpful to a channel of my size. Thank you so much. All right. Let's run headlong into the dark and bring the light. There are cryptids all over the world that share startling similarities. And when you start lining these beings up side by side, North American Dogman against European werewolves, Himalayan Yeti against North American Sasquatch, river serpents in Africa against lake monsters in Scotland, you quit seeing isolated campfire stories and you start seeing a pattern. The same broad creature types show up over and over again. The giant hairy man-thing, the water serpent, the flying predator, the shadowy humanoid that stalks the edge of the village. Local culture and landscape put different clothes on them, but the skeleton of the story remains the same. It's exactly like looking at lizards across continents. Different colors, different crests, sometimes even different abilities. But the same basic design because they're all solving similar problems in slightly different environments. That repetition starts to feel less like coincidence and more like taxonomy. If we were dealing with purely random human imagination, you'd expect more chaos. Millions of bizarre one-off monsters with no family resemblance, each tied tightly to its birthplace. But instead, we see families of cryptids that behave almost like clans. We have forest giants, aquatic serpents, winged predators, subterranean humanoids, fairy-type tricksters. Cultures that supposedly had no contact describe creatures that could be cousins. Either the human mind is wired to keep rediscovering the same archetypal predators, or there is a real category of beings, spiritual, physical, or something in between, that keeps brushing against us, and we keep giving them whatever language and folklore we have on hand. That's where this idea of cryptid eligibility comes in for me. If a creature keeps reappearing across time, geography, and belief systems with only minor cosmetic edits, it starts to qualify as more than a random myth. It behaves like a stable species within either the animal world, the spiritual world, or some overlapping territory where the two blur. These patterns hint at a shared source, a hidden ecology that doesn't really care about our borders, about our religions, or even our scientific comfort zones. So whether you call them undiscovered animals, interdimensional predators, or spiritual hybrids, their global consistency suggests they belong to a real, structured order of things, an order that we've only glimpsed through tracks in the mud, whispered legends, and the occasional ruined life of somebody who swears they saw one. So today, we're going to talk about cryptids from the southern realm, Central and South America, my other home, and compare them to my current home in North America. We are a connected people, and as such, share many monsters, and they are all quite visceral and fascinating. The first we're going to talk about is the Wayob and the Nahuales. These are shape-shifting humanoids that exist on the forest edge. Historical accounts from the earliest Spanish writings on Mesoamerica contain repeated accusations that local shamans could turn themselves into animals, jaguars, coyotes, owls, or gaunt half-human things that prowled at night. They remind me a lot of the Skinwalkers from Navajo lore and, well, many other Native American tribes' lores. The Spanish called these sorcerers Nahuales, from Nahuatl, Nahuali. Fray Diego de Landa, who oversaw the infamous burning of Maya books in Yucatan in 1562, nevertheless preserved a trove of testimony. He said there were men here who at night became beasts of the woods, leaving no trace of their human form. Landa did not dismiss these as legends. He reported them as affidavits, sworn testimonies given under torture or in confessions describing human footprints that turned into animal prints mid-trail, villagers being attacked by walking cats with human eyes, sorcerers captured while transforming. Matolenia wrote of soldiers encountering an old man who fled into the forest, but when cornered, he lunged at them as a jaguar thing before vanishing into underbrush that no normal cat could have slipped through. The Aztecs spoke of Nahuali or Nahual as an animal double that we all possess. This concept might have mixed with European ideas of witchcraft and werewolves, yielding that sort of modern notion that a Nahual is a sorcerer who can transform into an animal. The Nahual is always a creature of evil. It drinks the blood of people, often children, and it spreads disease. Nahuales, when they transform into predators such as coyotes, may also threaten a farmer's livelihood. Some say that you had to watch out and make sure the Nahuales didn't eat the chickens. Fighting off Nahuales can be very dangerous. Although they seem to be more vulnerable in their animal form, these beings were not to be trifled with. After all, they were medicine men and women, and witches and warlock types. They weren't really the ones that you wanted to mess with. The Nahual derives, of course, from central Mexican cultures, but the Mayan people of southern Mexico and beyond also have an equivalent sorcerer. It's called the Hue Chivo. And this is also a sorcerer who can transform into animals, but is primarily known to transform into a goat. Sorcerers also, like said before, do transform into many different animals, and that includes birds and dogs, and there seems to be no real limit to the type of animal shape a person can acquire with the right training. There are stories of these sorcerers even becoming pigs. Admittedly, I haven't come across a ton of stories of women that perform as huaychivos, so there might be some gendering of the role, but women have also been known to be able to transform into other animals. This might be a cultural thing. There may have been more medicine men than women in the Mayan culture. Now, these Mayan sorcerers, just like the Central Mexican ones, perform their misdeeds during the cover of night. They turn into animals by spinning 9 times in their place or by taking off their heads. The predilections seem to vary quite a bit. Sorcerer pigs like to scare people and kill animals. Sorcerer cats lick the faces of young women, making them ill so that they sort of waste away. The sorcerer goat seems rather versatile. I've heard that he does everything from eating children to haunting cemeteries. And the way to deal with these sorcerers, as you can imagine, varies. Some people say you must use salt, for example, rubbing bullets with a cross of salt. Others say that the remedy for dealing with Nahuales was to put a pair of open scissors beneath the bed. But as some people who lived through the revolution said, they weren't adverse to just simply attempting to shoot them with a rifle. Just as the Aztec idea of animal doubles might have inspired the creation of these shape-shifting sorcerers, ancient Mayan beliefs about human souls might have inspired the modern huaychivo. For example, the people of Chamula believe every person has an animal double, and whatever happens to your animal double also affects you. The Maya of Zinacatan believe that humans have multiple souls, one of which is an animal. And this kind of could maybe even feed into the idea of reincarnation as animals. Ancient Maya art features many animal companions or animal transformations. The Mayan glyph for way, which is Wayob in the plural form, refers to animal transformation, but is also related to sleep and hence to dreams, indicating that the sleeper might be able to transform into an animal or come in touch with their animal double while remaining in human form. Through ritual acts such as dancing or bloodletting and other special ceremonies, there's no shortage of them, priests and kings could also connect with their animal doubles, and this would increase their knowledge, their wisdom, and their insight. No matter how much we love them, dogs are also associated with the underworld, both in Mayan and Aztec mythology. They kind of accompany the souls of the dead in their journey into the afterlife. Mayan and Aztec burials sometimes even included dogs so that they might assist the deceased in this voyage, and dogs were even sacrificed at some points during certain ceremonies. Even in Native American legends, some of the rituals here from the people who came before us involve eating dog meat so that you can connect with your animal form. The god Akchua was also honored with the sacrifice of a dog with spots the color of cacao, which we might now know as chocolate. Obviously, an incredibly important crop. It's not hard to see how these entities from Aztec and Mayan lore connect to Native American lore, the legends of the Skinwalker and the shapeshifter is very prominent all over the world, but they seem to have a special relationship between the northern and southern Americas. There's a very deep connection to nature, not only nature, but also the fact that even if you aren't performing in any one type of magic or another, you have a connection to nature regardless. You have a sort of counterpart to you that is rooted in nature, that is beyond magic. It is just part of who you are as a human. And I think that's very interesting. And I think we can look back to the Garden of Eden, and we can sort of just consider what man's relationship might have been with back in those days. For instance, God gave Adam animals before he gave him woman. And so was that to imply that man's relationship with nature, having come before his relationship with woman, was more prominent for a while before man became lonely and then God crafted woman out of man? What was and what is man's relationship with nature supposed to be like? What did God originally intend for it to be like? And to that end, is there still a very deep connection that we have failed, for the most part, to understand, that we have failed to internalize? And if you want to take it a step further, it's not hard to see how people who abuse animals or neglect animal life are essentially opposite of nature. They are unnatural for those traits, and that's why many serial killers have those types of traits. These are all really interesting things that I sometimes just sit and ponder when I've had too many cups of coffee and been in a dark room for too long. But I think that they are all really important questions and things to consider. There's another creepy cryptid called the Camazotz, and I'm not going to spend too much time on the Camazotz because, first of all, this being is more rooted in legend and lore as a god and less of a cryptid, but also it can be sort of attributed to the massive bats of South and Central America. Originally, when I started the research, I saw it as sort of a correlation to Mothman, but as some of you might know, I actually think Mothman is a suit for a specific entity. I don't think that the Mothman itself is a moth cryptid. I think that it is a piece of technology. But just since I already started this, the Camazotz means death bat in the Quiche Mayan language of Guatemala. And it kind of originated deep in Mesoamerican mythology as a dangerous cave-dwelling bat creature. And there's a cult following for the creature that began amongst the Zapotec Indians of Oaxaca, Mexico. And the figure was later adopted into the pantheon of the Maya Quiche tribe. And the legends of the bat god were then later recorded in Maya literature. But bats are considered to be menacing creatures in many cultures, as we all well know. They are nocturnal and thus associated with the night, which is also often associated with death and their connection to the vampire, etc., etc. And many common species have a bizarre appearance, which makes them all the more off-putting for humans. It doesn't help that there is a species that actually sucks blood. The vampire bat. In the Maya culture, the bat god Camazotz is linked to death, and also the name of a monstrous creature which inhabited a cave called the House of Bats in the Popol Vuh. And most scholars believe that Camazotz was inspired by the common vampire bat. At one point, they kind of went extinct or disappeared, so we don't really have any more living examples of how big they actually were, but they were pretty big. And this monster had a roughly humanoid body. He had the head of a bat and a nose that kind of resembled a flint knife. The monster was said to attack victims by the neck and decapitate them. It's recorded that this creature decapitated the Maya hero Hunahpu. And Camazotz is also one of the 4 animal demons that is responsible for essentially wiping out mankind during the age of the first sun. So you can kind of give a little bit of Nephilim characteristics to him in that way. Bat-like demons and monsters are common in South and Central America. Another example is the story of Chon Chon in Peru and Chile, which is thought to be created when a sorcerer known as a kaku performs a magical rite. And this rite causes his severed head to essentially sprout giant ears and talons at death. The giant ears then become wings. This ubiquity of giant bat monster legends leads many archaeologists to propose that the monsters have a basis in encounters with an actual real animal. And that might be the giant vampire bat, or it might not. If you see vampire bats today, they're not exactly scary. They're actually kind of cute. They have a funny little face. So it would be interesting, in my opinion, if this was solely attributed to cute little bats, because these beings are typically very violent, very aggressive, very demonic entities, and not necessarily just cute little bats. But the vampire bat is favored because of its historical association with bloodletting and sacrifice. And if there was a version of them that were as big as a man back in these times, then yeah, that would be pretty scary to behold. But it is also possible that the legends could be derived from something more sinister, like a Nephilim, or like a demon, or like some kind of spiritual entity, which may still exist today, unlike these gigantic vampiric bats from the ancient days. Something that I think is maybe not from solely from the ancient days is the Aluxob, which I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, the Aluxob or the Aluxob, but it is basically a tiny person. And we've been talking about tiny people a little bit lately. We've been talking about them in the Appalachians. We've been talking about the Duende a little bit. And I talked a little bit about that on the Dark Florida podcast that's coming out tomorrow as well. So definitely head over to Dark Florida and check that out. And, I went to Iceland last year, I believe, or I think it was last year. Yeah, last year, and made a movie looking for the Huldufolk, which are hidden people from Iceland. You can find that on my channel as well. And then next year, I'm hoping to go back down to South America and search for the goblins or the duende, the little people who are a little bit menacing and kind of not really on your side. Well, surprise, surprise, the ancient peoples of these regions also had accounts of small humanoid forest dwellers, and they're conceived as being about knee-high and in appearance resembling miniature, traditionally dressed Maya people. And tradition holds that the Aluxob are generally invisible, but they are able to assume physical form for purpose of communicating with and frightening humans, as well as to sort of congregate together. And they're generally associated with natural features such as forests and caves and stones and fields, but they can also be enticed to move somewhere through offerings. And this reminded me of the Icelandic tales of the Huldufolk and how sometimes they would take the forms of nature and move about the countryside that way, as sort of a disguise. Their description in Maya lore and mythological role are somewhat reminiscent of these other sprite-like mythical entities in a number of other cultural traditions, such as the Celtic leprechaun, because the tricks that they play are very similar. And some Maya believe that the Aluxob are called into being when a farmer builds a little house on his property, most often in a maize field. And we've talked about how maize might be a crop of false gods as well because of its intent. If you guys have heard my episode on cannibal corn, and there's been actual literature written about this. There's a good book called Man Corn, and it seems to lead people to cannibalism once in a while. And I'm not referring to the canned corn that you pull off a shelf today, or even the corn that's farmed today. But in these ancient cultures, and you don't have to look far. You can look at the Aztec and the Maya and these ancient people who had the original maize, and you can see even going up north into running a blank here, the Anasazi people. you have a trend in cannibalism around maize-oriented people. And science has sort of lended a little hand here and supported the idea that ancient maize, for some reason, seemed to be connected to cannibalism. So it's interesting that you have these little beings that farmers would build houses for around their crops, and then for 7 years they would help the corn grow. They would allegedly summon rain. They would patrol the fields at night. They would whistle to scare off predators or crop thieves. And at the end of 7 years, the farmer must close the windows and doors of that little house and seal the Alux inside. And if this is not done, then they will run wild and start playing tricks on people. And stories say that they will occasionally stop and ask farmers or travelers for some kind of offering as well. And if they are refused, then the Aluxes will often wreak havoc and spread illness. But if their conditions are met, then it's thought that they will protect a person from thieves or even bring them good luck. And if they're treated with respect, it appears that they can be helpful, but they're never the type that you really want around you necessarily, because they kind of do their own thing. And the word duende is sometimes used interchangeably with alux, this being, this alux. The duende is a Spanish word for a supernatural creature, commonly known as a goblin. And I've been talking about them a little more lately because I actually have one that I believe is captured in one of my storage units that I took from South America. And every time it's in my house, very bizarre and strange things happen. And I'm working on making a documentary about that because I think you guys will find it really strange and interesting. It's one of those things that I've only recently started talking about because it does indeed make me sound like an insane person, but I'm only relaying the experience that I've had. And there are striking similarities between these ancient Maya little people and the duende of modern times. And the Spanish conquistadors and pirates and people who came to these Mayan and Aztec lands have recorded run-ins with these goblins. Pirates of that era would often, the ones coming from the British Isles, believe that fairies were everywhere and that they were quite common in this southern continent, especially amongst those of lower socioeconomic class, because, well, that's what pirates generally were. However, the Maya themselves would claim that the Alux are the spirits of their ancestors sometimes, or the spirits of the land, and that gives them their sort of Fey similarity, and that these beings, of course, preceded contact with Western civilization. Kind of like the Skinwalker, it's believed a good trend to not name them out loud because it will summon a disgruntled little goblin from their home. And similar to in Iceland with the elves, they have even down in these regions of Mexico and whatnot rerouted roads or built little houses to offer thanks for building roads over these Alux territories and stuff like that. So there is a lasting sort of belief, even if it's only traditional, as we've been saying lately, just simply giving these things attention gives them power. And so there is a kind of lasting tradition to respect these entities even today. And I think that is fascinating. Also fascinating is, just like their North American counterparts, the South American people of the ancient times also had their own Bigfoot legends. And they had this entity called the Sisemité. And it's this cryptid of the Central American highlands. It was a creature described in both indigenous tradition and scattered colonial and even modern accounts as something that is somewhere halfway between a man and an ape. And the name itself is said to come from a Nahuatl word meaning diviner, hinting that this being does not belong only to the realm of brute animals, as in the animal kingdom, but also to something much more uncanny and liminal. And across the region, different peoples know it by other names. Among the Mosquito, we have the Suinta, and it's this spirit of the mountains. And in the Mayan tradition, we have Utukter Huitzor, which I'll probably say wrong, but it refers to a guardian hill sort of spirit. And all of these names circle the same ideas, that in the forested mountains there is a powerful human-like presence that watches, it judges, and if you're unlucky, it will even attack you. Descriptions of the Sisemité are surprisingly consistent. It's said to be larger than a man, with a build that is reminiscent of a gorilla. It's massive and heavy in the shoulders and chest. Its body is typically covered in dark or long, stiff black hair that can hang down nearly to the ground. And unlike a true ape, it is often given a disturbingly human head with very large, prominent eyes that are set in a face that can be read as almost identical to a human, almost capable of expression and intent. The hands of this thing are said to have only 4 fingers and no true thumb. And that's kind of an anatomical detail that recurs in multiple tellings. And in keeping with many other monstrous beings of Central and South American lore, its big toes are reversed, pointing backwards. There's even a story of a similar type of being that we'll get to where the feet are actually backwards themselves. The entire footprint is backwards. But there are other devils in the region that are explained in the same way and have these same obscure tracks that are allegedly used to confuse anybody who tries to follow this being. The creature is usually described as nocturnal. At a walk, it moves upright on 2 legs, towering kind of like a man, but when it runs, it drops to all 4s, and this allows it to cover ground with terrifying speed, and it has unnaturally long strides. Witnesses and storytellers remark on the length of its step as something horrifying in of itself. It takes these massive leaps and bounds. It's believed to live in the caves, and it feeds primarily on crabs and snails, as well as whatever else it can scavenge or hunt. In many accounts, though, it does indeed prey on travelers, appearing on lonely mountain paths or on jungle roads, sometimes attacking outright or stalking from the shadows. It depends. This being also has a particular reputation for kidnapping women and children, which is another interesting trait of Nephilim. Its vocalizations are said to be these eerie howls or screams that kind of echo through the night. And among the Chorti people, its calls are referred to as maricone, which is a phrase that is glossed as "we will get you," as if the sound itself that this creature makes is a threat. And that kind of remind me of the Sierra sounds, where people were saying that the Sierra sounds are a language, and that the very sounds they are making are things they are saying. It's a language. And in that way, I began to think, what if the Sierra sounds are just a language that has been forgotten, and that's why they were misunderstood. Now, some have claimed that the Sisemité is even preserved in ancient art, and one reported example is a figure on a Mayan carving at the ruin of Zunan Tunich in Belize, where cryptozoologist Lars Thomas interpreted a depiction of the creature. And whether that interpretation is correct or not, the suggestion does fit neatly with the idea that the Sisemité or something like it has been a sort of part of this mythic landscape for a very long time. This is by no means a modern concept. And the first European account associated with the Sisemité is usually said to come from these Spanish gold prospectors in the late 18th century, as you'd expect. While camped in the Honduran mountains, they allegedly confronted a large ape-like creature that had been raiding their supplies in recent days. And the story claims that the men shot and killed the thing, treating it kind of as an unknown animal rather than a demon, but its size, the hairiness, the human-like form, they echo other indigenous descriptions as well, and these tales are often impossible to verify in detail now, of course, and everybody who believes in science will say that there's no way these things exist, but they do mark the point where European and local traditions begin to overlap, and I think that's a really important overlap. It shows that what the people believed in, European outsiders also come to believe in when they visited these South American and Central American lands. By the end of the 19th century, the creature reappears in a more personal narrative. Edward Jonathan Hoyt reported that while sleeping in Honduras, he awoke to find a large ape-like being crawling over the end of his bunk. He claimed to have shot it at close range, and in his account, the creature was roughly human in shape, about the height of a shorter man, covered in hair, and disturbingly human in outline. The episode kind of reads like a classic frontier encounter with some kind of unknown primate. You know, the sudden contact in the dark, a gunshot, and then the uneasy memory of having nearly been seized by something that should not exist. And yet, you also can't just attribute this story when stacked up against the dozens of others that have been recorded as just a frontier story. But that's the way that science would like you to interpret it. In the early 20th century, a Honduran man named Don Manuel Mejia preserved a family story of another meeting with this creature. His grandfather, who had traveled to Pico Bonito, which was one of Honduras' major peaks, supposedly came face to face with a Sisemité. It walked upright like a man, he said, but was taller and much hairier. It was a hulking figure that moved with an unsettling blend of human gait and animal power. The encounter did not end in an attack in this case, but it did add to the sense that something big and bipedal haunted the montane forests. But the stories don't end there. One of the most dramatic reports was preserved by the writer Harold T. Wilkins, who recounted a story from an expedition to Honduras led by the explorer and archaeologist Thomas Gann. And during this journey, one of Gann's carriers was attacked and savaged by some type of ape-like creature in the forest. Gann and his associate, Frank Bloquenot, followed massive tracks to a cave that were deep in the jungle. And near the cave mouth, they saw footprints sunk into soft clay that looked unnervingly like the thumb and first fingers of a gigantic human hand. And each digit ended in a giant claw, like a great claw at the end of the fingers. Dale A. Drinnan, retelling and analyzing this material, adds still more detail from the same tradition. He says on one occasion, these guys and a local companion noticed branches that were thrashing at the top of a tall tree. And this local companion warned that this was the devil, an expression that was often used for the same forest creature that we've been talking about. One of the guys there was armed and allegedly only with a light rifle that was loaded with duck shot, but he reluctantly advanced forward to investigate, and a terrible commotion followed, with wild screaming and crashing in the undergrowth. When the others reached the gunman, they found that he had been completely torn open, with 4 vast gouges clawed across his torso that were so deep that his entrails protruded. His entrails became outrails, if you will. And allegedly he was barely alive, and he gasped that the devil had ripped him open and then fled into the forest. Later, questioning of nearby villagers revealed that this forest devil was pretty well known to them, and they said it attacked lone women when it could, and it would often tear off their clothing and force them to the ground, with the clear implication that some accounts had left out the most brutal details, which you might be able to imagine. Another sort of kind of Nephilim vibe, and the creature was said to be covered in long, stiff black hair, and hunters sometimes found tree trunks scratched or rubbed 5 or 6 feet above the ground, with strands of the coarse black hair being embedded in the bark. You could find evidence of this thing in the woods. Even in more bureaucratic settings, the Sisemité appears as something treated not as superstition, but as an actual real-world threat. Not too long ago in Guatemala, a man named Miguel Huzul reportedly filed an actual police complaint, and he accused his son-in-law of delinquency for allowing Huzul's daughter to be kidnapped by a Sisemité, while the younger man stood by and did absolutely nothing. So whatever the truth behind that allegation, it does kind of show that in some communities, the creature is regarded as enough of a concrete reality that it can be named in actual formal legal language. And that is a difference between there and here. You can't really expect to complain about Bigfoot here kidnapping your son or your daughter or whatever, and anybody to take you seriously. Researchers have pointed out that among the Quechua Maya of southern Belize, the inhabitants of the forest are kind of divided into three broad categories. There's the major deities, like the gods, there's the local spirit beings, and then there's actual normal animals. And strikingly, the Sisemité is placed in the last of these, the normal animal sort of category, alongside familiar creatures such as jaguars and apes and whatnot. And in that worldview, the Sisemité is not a god or a ghost, but another bizarre resident of the forest, a strange and dangerous being, but fundamentally an animal. And they note that large apes in general are fully capable of disemboweling a person with nothing but their nails and strength. We've seen that before. But they also compare the reported attacks and abductions to documented behavior among great apes, such as male orangutans, which have occasionally been accused in local reports of doing terrible things to human women that nobody should imagine. So whether one treats the Sisemité as an undiscovered ape, a folkloric way of talking about the dangers of the forest, or a genuine supernatural guardian of the mountains, the Sisemité stands as one of those figures that refuses to allow you to think that it's just something from mythology, but also doesn't give you a body necessarily. And like I said before, there are other versions of the Sisemité, or this kind of Bigfoot being across Brazil, Peru, and the wider Amazon basin. There's this being called the Mapinguari, and it's described as a gigantic, foul-smelling, shaggy monster that moves somewhere between a man, a bear, and some kind of prehistoric mistake, if you will. And in modern media, it does get called the Brazilian Bigfoot, but that nickname kind of completely misses the horror that's baked into the original lore. In many indigenous accounts, it's not just a hairy giant. It is a creature with a gaping mouth in its stomach, and it has long hook-like claws. It has backward-facing feet. It has skin as tough as an alligator, and sometimes a single glaring eye like a cyclops. But backward feet, as a general rule, would confuse trackers and make him harder to follow. You would be going one way, thinking you're on your way to them, not knowing that they're actually going the other way the whole time. And this also opens up the greater possibility that you will be ambushed, because you will be walking deeper into the forest thinking that you're chasing it, when in reality you're literally walking into its trap. And it does come from the roots of the language that mean the thing with twisted or crooked feet, which kind of tells you what early storytellers and accounts thought mattered most. And like with most cryptids, descriptions kind of vary by region, but the core image is consistent. It's a hulking, man-tall or taller creature covered in long dark hair with arms that are strong enough to tear open trees or buildings, and it has this rancid smell that is so overwhelming that people talk about getting dizzy or weak just smelling it. In some stories, it walks on two legs like a monstrous man. In others, it lumbers on all fours like some kind of ground sloth. And some do swear, as I said before, that it has just a single eye and a second mouth on its stomach. Others say that it looks more like a gigantic deformed ape with thick armor-like skin, and hunters have even claimed that bullets bounce off of it unless you hit it in one very vulnerable spot near the navel. And that has led some to believe that it might be wearing some type of armor or have a type of natural body armor itself. And this thing has been recorded all over South and Central America, all over the Amazon rainforest, Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, and beyond. That matters because most of the terrain is still only superficially explored. So there are huge corridors of forest that are known only to the people who live and work there. Indigenous communities, rubber tappers, loggers, gold prospectors, and those types of people. And those are exactly the type of people who keep claiming to see this being. Many Amazonian traditions, though, they don't treat this entity as just a random monster. It's described explicitly as a kind of guardian of the forest. It's a punisher of those who would overhunt or burn or ravage the jungle. It's seen as kind of this being that protects the forest, and it's as old as the forest itself. It's an enforcer that may have even once been human, maybe an aged shaman, an elder that has kind of been twisted into a monstrous shape as power builds and body decays. Elsewhere, they call it an ancient king of the region, dethroned but still stomping through this ruined kingdom. Again, we get this Nephilim vibe, but we also get something else that I think is really interesting, especially when you talk about it's bullet resistant, because human technology is supposed to fail against the forest's own weapon. In this particular case, it screams before attacking, not as a warning, but as a terror tactic. In some Christianized version, it prowls, especially on Sundays and feast days, killing those who break the Sabbath to hunt. You know, stuff like this, it made me think about other things too. Like, what if, and this goes back to discussion that we've recently had about nature revolting against mankind, and the bear attacks in Japan, and the animals that have lately been really kind of attacking humans in increasingly violent ways and in increasing numbers of occurrences. And it's kind of like, are there entities that we don't know about, that were created, let's just say by God, that are here to protect the earth if humanity fails to do it itself? You know, like we said before, Adam was a shepherd of types. And if mankind fails to shepherd nature, will nature be forced to shepherd mankind because of the sheer destruction that the shepherd is allegedly committing upon the flock? Will nature have to produce its own shepherd to control mankind when mankind begins to destroy nature? When mankind loses its position as a protector and becomes more of a destructor, will nature have to inevitably protect itself? And did God create special creatures that will come into existence for those moments? I think that's an interesting conversation. I don't even know if I'm getting my point across here, but you know, as man, we like to believe that we have everything mapped out. We found all the creatures, we found all the types, there's nothing really special left to find. But I just don't believe that that's true. And so I do wonder sometimes if there are forces at play that, you know, they're not mentioned in the Bible, they're not mentioned in the Book of Enoch, and yet they do exist for a specific purpose at a specific time based on how mankind is behaving. Something to think about. And of course, no zoological collection of creepy crawlies would be complete without some kind of water predator. And so we've got the Ahuizotl, and this enters the written record in the 16th century Florentine Codex, where Nahua informants described it as a black, slick-skinned aquatic predator that lurked in deep pools and caverns, essentially. And later retellings refine the image. It's a dog-sized body with waterproof fur, and it has hands like a monkey's at the end of its forelimbs, and a fully formed human hand at the tip of its tail. And that tail hand is kind of the signature. Obviously, this is a very strange creature. It reminds me of some of those biological hybrids that are spoken about in Watcher and Nephilim lore. Once again, I keep bringing it up because I see these parallels, and it does remind me as one of those things that was when the Bible describes things being sinned against, animal kind being sinned against. This seems like a genetic experiment of sort because of this, and if this thing is even real, and it reaches from the shallows or over the canoes, it hooks on people's ankles, it grabs people, and then it drags them down in a movement that is so fast that most people above the surface never even really understand what happened before the victim is gone. As if the hand at the end of the tail wasn't enough, what really separates the Ahuizotl from the usual run of river demons is not how it kills, but what it does after. In story after story, the pattern is the same. A fisherman, a bather, a passerby is seized and vanishes beneath the surface. And then 3 days later, the body floats back up, and everybody knows immediately who did it. The corpse is usually slick and wet, but the skin is strangely unbroken. And only when the relatives look closer do they see what's missing. The eyes. The eyes are missing. They are always carefully scooped out of their sockets. The teeth are removed from the jaws, and the fingernails and the toenails are stripped away. And this being, people said, did not feel like it needed to waste time on human meat. It went straight for the parts of the human body that were symbolically loaded. Sight, the mouth, and the smallest defensive claws that we have on the human body. Because of that, as you can imagine, death by Ahuizotl was not really treated like an ordinary drowning. Only priests were allowed to touch such a corpse. Anyone else who tried risked becoming the creature's next victim, they said, or suffering some kind of wasting curse, sometimes described as a creeping gout that would slowly ruin this person's limbs. The body had to be buried in a special kind of house that was surrounded by water so that the soul could fully cross over, and that burial prescription kind of tells you exactly what kind of being the Aztecs thought they were dealing with here. This wasn't random predation. It was a collection to them. That's just bizarre to think about. In the Aztec worldview, though, those taken by the Ahuizotl did not descend into some generic underworld. Through the agency of this creature, they were transferred into the realm of the Tlaloc, which is the storm and rain god realm. This is a different type of paradise. This is the watery paradise. It was reserved for those who died by water or by lightning or by wasting diseases associated with the rain deity. And in some versions, the Ahuizotl is the fish warden, who is tasked with guarding the lake's bounty. In others, it is explicitly sent by Tlaloc and these other gods, these water and fertility gods, to collect the souls of those the gods favor. So from the human standpoint, being dragged beneath the water, mutilated, and then re-emerging eyeless is a nightmare. But from the priest standpoint, it is kind of a divine promotion with clear ritual protocols. And that mismatch in perspective is kind of where the real unease lives, because then you kind of have to wonder, like, okay, well, are the priests here to protect these beings, or are the priests here to fend off these beings? And it seems like they made their choice in those days. But the Ahuizotl isn't just an ancient legend. Stories and tales have persisted through time. And for the people whose livelihoods depended on trusting the water, like the Chinampa farmers, the canoe traders, the reed cutters, fishermen, net casters, for them, the Ahuizotl was not some abstract theology. It was an actual, literal, practical hazard. And fishermen said that they witnessed it making the frogs and fish in lagoons suddenly explode to the surface all at once, as if the water itself was boiling. And if you were to rush in to try to fish this apparent bounty that had suddenly appeared on the surface, you risked becoming a victim of the Ahuizotl. Others said that when it hadn't claimed a human in a while, it would cry like a human baby. And that would draw out the compassion and the curious in mankind to see what child had been left to drown. And you can imagine that that would be very uneasy. And if you did hear a baby crying out in the wilderness, it is only natural for you to go and inspect. And so they say if you hear a baby by the lake at night, you should probably go and fetch a priest and not go investigate by yourself. Even Hernan Cortez himself reportedly wrote to the King of Castile that one of his men had been killed by an Ahuizotl. And we don't have a lovingly detailed autopsy to accompany this report, but we do have the note that the term was used. And just that term being used by Hernan Cortez is staggering. It's coming from a man who was quick to label indigenous religion as diabolical nonsense. So it is kind of an odd concession. Maybe he simply repeated what Nahua allies or informants told him about a soldier dragged under the lake system around Tenochtitlan. Either way, the Europeans' first experience of that landscape included not just human entities, as we've been coming to understand, but also a local conviction that the waters themselves could kill you because there were things inside them. The woods, the jungles themselves could kill you because there were things inside them that were abnormal to the European biomes. And nowadays, when modern people try to interpret these accounts of the Ahuizotl, they say, well, maybe this was a way for the people of these days to make sense of their own appetite. This was a society, for instance, that practiced large-scale human sacrifice, ritual cannibalism, and elaborate corpse processing with an almost industrial efficiency. Death and this kind of dismemberment and cannibalism, all this kind of stuff was very commonplace in these societies at this time. So in that context, a lake monster that eats only the eyes, the teeth, and the nails begins to look kind of like a mirror held up to the culture. A sort of non-human agent who carves humans for the gods the way humans carve each other. It is a projection, according to these types of people who believe not in the actual creature, but more in the theology of it. It is a projection of the sacrificial machine into the environment, admitting that basically the water itself has learned this. You know what? Like, it's, to me, it's easier to believe in the creature than trying to analyze the thoughts of a people that are long gone. But at the end of the day, here's the real conspiracy that is buried under all the folklore. Every culture that lived on land or close to the water built something like these creatures into their worldview, some kind of guardian that bites back when you stop treating a place as sacred, or when it catches you off guard in these natural elements, and when you start treating nature as an inventory, etc. And we tore down the temples, we paved over the lakes, we renamed the jungle as real estate, we delumbered it, we mined it, but we never actually disabled the system that punishes that kind of treatment of the land. So you can call it gods, you can call it ecology, you can call it the planet's immune response, whatever name you give it, it's still there. And that is undeniable. People are still having sightings all across the world of cryptids, many that are resembling these cryptids we've talked about today. So if the old stories are true, somewhere out there in the dark, there is still a hand flexing at the end of a tail. There is still something huge turning its backward feet towards the next clear cut. And if they aren't true, then we're alone with what we've done to the water and the trees, and that might be even worse. There's nothing protecting nature from us. Either way, the next time you're on black water at night or standing at the edge of a forest that feels maybe just a little bit too quiet, or you see something in the water that shouldn't really be there because you don't really have things that big in the water in your area traditionally, or even you're walking through the woods and you hear a sound that is extremely abnormal to the sounds that the woods typically make. Maybe just think about it and remember what the ancients were really saying, and that is that there is more to the world than what meets the eye. It is only the modern age, the modern era, the gods of modern technology that would tell you that the gods of the ancient world never existed, that the beings of the ancient world that all of these cultures testified about were not real, and that those were all products of imagination. There's far more to this world than we know, and there's even far more to this world than they are telling us, because they know even more than we do. They control the science, they control the history, they control the story and the narrative. So don't let what your eyes see and what your spirit sees, don't let those things simply not exist because science tells you they shouldn't exist. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Give God's plan the benefit of the doubt. Give spirituality the benefit of the doubt, the supernatural. Give these things a chance, because I don't think that millions upon millions of people across thousands of cultures and countries throughout time can all be wrong. The life is in the blood.